The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me. We're doing our Getting the Most Out of Smart Response webinar today. And I have to at least give the people in BC their snaps for coming along, because we're a bit PD'd out right now in BC. We just had conference or province-wide Pro D Day, so thank you to those of you who are joining me. And I know we've got a lot of PD happening across the province right now, and it's been really, really exciting. So I'm just going to get started. We're going to try and get through all of this content in an hour. And basically, I'm going to walk us through 4 different points. And those of you who joined me for webinars before know that I'll stop and take questions and do as much as I can, and to respond to questions throughout the webinar. And then I am recording this, and it will be posted, as well as a support document will go up on our website within a couple of days. So we'll get started. So as always, I always like to start with some research. There's a reason why we're doing what we do, and the reason why certain tools are more effective than others. So we're going to look at some research. And then we're going to talk about smart response hardware. If you haven't really looked at response lately, this is a good place to start, because there might have been some changes that you might not be aware of. So we'll look at that. Then we'll look at the response software, which really at the end of the day is the heart and soul of what we do and what makes the response better and better every year. And that's what comes very last, is the Response 2012 improvements. And I want to shout some of these improvements from the rooftops and get this out to as many teachers as I can, because it's going to really make assessment much more effective for us. So I'll just check questions and chat, and everything seems to be on the up and up. So I'm going to just keep going as I've actually remembered to open my microphone and start my screen this time. So I'm going to come into full screen mode for a little bit while we move forward here now. Those of you using Notebook 11, you may have noticed this difference. Right now you can't see my full screen. That was a teacher request, and this is a bit of a sidebar, but that was a teacher request to not see that gray bars at the side anymore. But now my lessons don't always fit properly on my screen. So I'm going to hit these 3 black buttons, and I'm going to switch from page width, which is the default, to entire page, and now I can see my entire page. So I've given the feedback to the developers that I need to be able to decide which one I prefer, either page width or entire page. Right now I prefer entire page, so we can see this beautiful image properly. And this is taken from a school district in Saskatchewan, from the Prairie School Division, and they've posted some beautiful images along with some assessment phrases, and we're going to see those a couple of times right now. This one is assess, is derived from the Latin term assidere, which literally means to sit beside. And I think that part is something we've actually kind of missed sometimes in all of us, and I was guilty of it back in the day as well, is did we always sit beside our kids to help assess them? So this is a little bit how to hold their hands a little bit more literally or figuratively to help them through. This was an analogy that was just shared with me on Monday. I was very fortunate to be at a professional development conference up in Dawson Creek, BC, and there was an assessment guy called Damien Cooper, who's British but lives in Ontario, who shared this analogy, and I love it. Assessment should be like hockey. So assessment for and as learning, I suppose this could be any sport, but we're going to use hockey for lack of NHL. Assessment for and as learning is like your tryouts and your practices. And this is our opportunities to improve through feedback. So we're giving our students or our players those opportunities to get better and better. And they are using it themselves to get better and better. So you talk to kids who play hockey, and those practices should be hard. They should be sweating. They should be trying to get better and better, so that when we get to the assessment of learning, those are your games and your playoffs. And the players use that feedback that they got during practice to play their best during the game. Now, does it always happen? No, things happen during games that we can't predict, and it's the same with assessment. But we need to give them these opportunities over here to help them be successful over here. And this is the part where, when we listen to current theories of assessment, that this part needs to maybe start to change for some of our students. And so with some of the features in response, this can maybe look a little bit different for us. So I really, really dig this analogy, and my brain is glomming onto this. I'm going to use it moving forward. Stiggins, I was fortunate during some of my master's work to do a lot of research on Stiggins, and there's some good quotes from him. Success rests in part on what students do with and about those results that we give them from assessment. So using response and some of the new features that I'm going to show you with reporting and things like that, that can make it easier. I'm not saying that this hardware and software solves all our assessment problems, but it can make it easier to help the students move forward and do certain things with the results that they get. This is another one from Stiggins and another beautiful image. Students can hit any target they know about and that stands still for them. So this is another way that we can help them to understand what they're trying to hit with these assessments. And another one from Stiggins, I obviously really dug him. Assessment is most productive when its purpose is for learning. And I think that if you're joining me today, and those of you who aren't joining me today, I'm probably preaching to the choir a little bit if you're tuning into this, because it's about effective assessment. That's why we're here today. So the use of response helps to assess for, as, and for learning. Oh, whoops, that should be of. Haha, I'll have to change that for my PDF that I give out. Sorry about that. Interactive response systems help increase student learning. That's well researched. The student interactive response systems help to enhance teachers' ability to target areas of concern. I know that when I used response with my grade 1s, that's when I had a response kit, was with the little ones, and I actually used it for the most part for pre-assessment. I used it at the beginning of a unit so that I could figure out who and where I needed to target. So that was me pre-thinking, where was I going to go with my teaching. My post-assessment wasn't necessarily always with response, but definitely to help moving forward. It allows the students to receive immediate feedback. You can't underestimate the power of that. And to enable teachers to give that fast feedback as well. And with the reporting we're going to look at, it really, really helps. So teachers can quickly adapt their learning to address the gaps. So our learning as well, so I need to address my own gaps in learning, but adapt our teaching to address the gaps in learning before we move on. So these are taken from some research pieces. And there's an article in the Globe and Mail as well. So there's some smart action research that I grabbed some of those bullet points from. So if you're interested in taking a look at that research a little bit more, I can send that to you, where it is on SMART's website. And then there's a great article from the Globe and Mail that I can also share that, and it's a school in Ontario, I believe, that talks about how clickers help teachers read the classroom. And so this is from May of 2012, and so it talks about, and this is great, this quote right here from a kid, "Oh good, a quiz." So how often do we hear that? And it was in a positive, not in a sarcastic way. So the most powerful single innovation that enhances achievement is feedback. The simplest prescription for improving education must be dollops of feedback. Thank you, Marzano. That's a great, great quote, and a beautiful picture again from Saskatchewan. So we'll take a look at some potential questions. Doesn't look like we've got any. Wow, okay, that's good. Before we move on, and now we're going to start to get in the heart of soul of what we're looking at today. So with response, it's a little bit about the hardware, so it's a little bit about what clickers you have, but it's a lot about the software, and that's the biggest piece of the puzzle. Now, that being said, I realize not every district rolls out the new versions of Notebook and Response every year, but maybe with looking at this, some of us can become advocates for helping our districts to understand why upgrades are important, because what comes in every year's rollout package are teacher requests for improvements to Notebook and Response and all those other things. So this is a way that we can help bring about a little bit of understanding about why upgrades are important. So Current versions, for those of you who may not be aware, Notebook 11 is the current version. You obviously get the new version of the Smart Product Drivers, which enable touch. And then our add-on piece of the current version is Response 2012. So you can see here I've got the little Response tab on the left-hand side. And so what I'm going to talk about today are the enhancements to Response 2012. I always say throw out that CD that either comes with your smartboard or that's in your response kit, because someone's going to try and install it and you'll be getting something old. So as soon as the CD is burned, it's dated. So your district hopefully has a fresh version of Notebook and Response. It comes in one big wrapper nowadays. And for you as teachers, if you want Smart Notebook and Response at home, you can grab the current versions of the software from Smart's website. And if you just go smarttech.com, you go support, you go software downloads, and that's where you can grab the latest versions. And I do have videos on my YouTube channel of how to download and install Notebook and Response, etc. And it comes, as I mentioned, in one big software wrapper so that you have the ability to pick and choose what you have access to. The great thing about Response is that when you get a little Smart Response clicker pack in that blue case that some of us are very familiar with, the way to activate your software is just to plug in a blue receiver. So you don't need to be tracking product keys, or like with Notebook software, you have to find your district's product key and install that so you can have Notebook at home. It's a very simple matter of taking your blue receiver and plugging it into your computer. Let it do its thinking for a little while, all your lights will flash, and then you'll get a little memo saying that Response is ready to use, and then that will have activated your software. Some machines require a little bit of a restart for that, but it also means it's easier for us to grab a receiver and take it home and activate our software at home, because many of us like to choose to create lessons at home in our pajamas. I know I certainly was a favorite of that and still am. Before we move on to some specifics about the software, I do want to talk about Sentio packs. I always say the biggest way that you can tell what version you have is by the big blue kit. If your big blue kit says Sentio on one side, you are using a Sentio kit. And if it says Sentio on there, or if the background of your clickers is yellow, you're using an old Sentio kit. Now, just because the clickers are quote-unquote older doesn't mean that they can't be used. So Smart about 4 or 5 years ago rebranded from Sentio, which no one understood what that meant. It did mean something student interactive something or other. No one remembered what that meant. So they rebranded to a word called Response, which makes a lot more sense. But with that came the improvements to the software. So don't try and install this old Sentio software. It was fine for then, but comparison to what Response can offer you, it is not great. So throw that in the bin. You certainly don't need that. Some of the differences that I'll point out, the software is the biggest difference. The current version of the Response is what you'll get the most out of. The difference with these clickers is that in your question types, you're not going to have the ability to send text answers. The model that looks very similar to this, I'm going to go through all the different models of Smart Response in a little bit. The model that looks the most like this is the PE, Response PE, and it looks the same except it doesn't have a yellow background, but those have the ability to text. And I'm going to show you how you choose what clicker you have later on. And the biggest change is to have the ability to have content pages within a response quiz. So that was the biggest difference to the Response software and the Sentio software. What do I mean by that? I'm going to show you an example of a lesson that has content pages interspersed with response questions. And so you can do some direct teaching and then immediately assess it. You can use your instant questions, of course, but this one is pre-planned. So this is something that you weren't able to do with the Response, or sorry, pardon me, with the Sentio stuff. So it would be question, 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 question. Most of the content you're going to grab from the Smart Exchange will look like that. It'll be question after question after question. But what it can look like is this. So I'm going to go into full screen mode for this. So this is a lesson from Smart. Everything that I use in this is either from Smart or from the Exchange. So here's an example of a content page. So we're going to use our reveal to reveal the current percentage of the Earth's atmosphere. And then the kids would use the eraser tool. Let me grab my eraser to grab the current percentage of makeup of the Earth's atmosphere. And then here's where we can do another interactive technique and teach them a little bit of this. Obviously, if I was doing this in a class, I'd have the kids fill this in. But here's where we can do a little bit of a reveal. And then immediately we get into a question. So here's our title page. And our first question is, which of the following gases are most likely formed the Earth's first atmosphere? And then we do another content page. And then I can do another drag to reveal. So that's how we can intersperse questions with content, which you could not do with the old Sentio software. You can do this now with the Sentio hardware and the response software, if that makes any sense. Let's see if we've got some questions. Nope. Anything in chat? No. Wow. You guys are either quiet or not even there at all. Some of us are here. Smaller group today, but all good. Okay, so we're going to keep going, and now we're going to take a look at the different models of response. And this was basically in response to the fact that we needed different models for different learners and different curriculum. So what's great about all of this, I'm going to point this out to start with, is that you're using the common software interface and data reporting no matter what model you're using. So we're using Notebook to create our lessons, and we're using Response to bring the questions in, and the teacher tools that's built into Response to gather the data and do the reporting piece. So the different models now are the Response LE. I like to think of that as early learning. Apparently the letters don't really mean a lot, but I try and think of them as something. So this is a great one. I'm going to bring that back up to big actually, because this is great for obviously little kids, non-readers, but as a universal design for learning support that kids of any ability can probably be able to use these types of buttons. Some kids with accessibility issues might need some help with the buttons, but this is something that most children will be able to use. And this was actually built in conjunction with Disney education, which was great. Then we have the Response PE. This is looking most like what we have as part, our old Sentio clickers look like that, but you can see it's a great background, and this says Smart Response PE. This one does have texting capabilities, but as I call it, it's old school texting, like with our older phones before we all had smartphones, how the world's changed in a few years. So the kids have to kind of go 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3 to put in their answers. It's a bit frustrating for the kids who aren't used to that, but it is a capability. If you're wanting to do texting or advanced math options, Response XE is huge. It's lots of capabilities. I really love that this is there, but you can see the example of the question in the screen there. It's really quite a remarkable thing for those older kids, and it feels, you know, more grown up for the kids. I do see that there's a question over at the side, and I'm just going to go through all the models and then I'll take the questions. This one is Response CE, and not a lot of people know about this one, and it's integrated as part of Smart Classroom Suite. And what Smart Classroom Suite is all about is one-to-one situations or lab situations where the teacher's using Notebook, the students have student edition of Notebook on their computers, and then the teacher uses Smart Sync to send and receive assignments and lessons and create groups. And then the response component is Response CE, and so the students get questions sent directly to them from the teacher computers, and the students answer on their computers using that suite of software products. This one's a Windows only option right now, Classroom Suite, but definitely one-to-one environments or lab environments are using this quite successfully. And the newest and seems to be getting the most heat and the most action right now and a lot of excitement every time I model it, and we are going to use it at the end of today, is Response VE, which is Virtual Edition. The teacher uses Notebook and Response, just like I have here, but any device that can get onto the internet can answer a response question. So what that looks like is this. So the students would go to response.smarttech.com, and every assessment the teacher runs, they get a unique assessment ID, and you guys are going to do this with me in a little bit. If you are using the teacher tools where you're signed in and not in anonymous mode, the students put in their student ID, and then you get quizzes, and this is the start of my quiz right there. So this will be something that is huge for those schools that are doing iPad deployments. Bring your own device. As long as you can get on the internet, you can take a Response VE quiz. So the pricing is per teacher, an unlimited number of students that can pop in. So let's take a look at a question here. The red light on my USB port. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So this one is all about getting the Sentio clicker, or receiver, pardon me, to work properly. And the asker is Katie. And Katie, I'm going to talk with you about this one offline. And I'll briefly talk about this, that the red light on the USB on the Sentio receiver, some days it works, some days it doesn't, and how can we get it to be consistent? Sometimes that does have to do with the version of software that you're using. And sometimes it's all in kind of the ordering that happens. So those of us who've used Response before, we know that we have to go Response, start a class. You have to start a class, and then after you start the class, you start the assessment. But also, I'll model from the Response drop-down menu when you open up the teacher tools. What you can do from the teacher tool side is to take a look at your hardware. And because I'm using Response VE right now, I don't have a receiver plugged in, because you don't need a receiver for the virtual edition of Response. But you do have the ability from the teacher tools to analyze and assess your receiver. And so if there's some issues with communication, then it will pop that up in this part of the, oh, and I don't even have a guy open. So I'm going to model that in a little bit, but when you go to my hardware part of the teacher tools, you can find that option to check your hardware out. The other thing I mentioned about the receiver is to, the only thing that really interferes with it is radio frequency. So if you're near an FM system for audio enhancement, that could cause some interference. But I had some similar issues last year with my receivers, just sometimes working and sometimes not. And once I did a software upgrade, things seem to settle down a little bit. But if it doesn't, then that's when I always recommend to get in touch with Smart Support, because they're the trained professionals as far as this goes. So if you go to Smart's website and you go to support, and then you go to the support center, and they've just revamped what this page looks like. And so you can go to the help section and troubleshoot on your own. You can also grab the help from within this drop down menu. So right here says Smart Response Help, so you can type in the question receiver inactive or receiver issues and see what comes up there. But Katie, you and I can discuss your specific issues offline, but thank you for sending that question to me, because that is the single biggest issue that I find that stumps people up, is when sometimes these lights flash green and sometimes they don't. And you get red and all sorts of weird things. Okay, so I'm going to do, I think I have one more question check right here. Yes, I do. And I'll check to see if anybody else has given me a question or a chat, and it doesn't seem to, so we're going to keep going. That's great. So now I'm going to talk about Response 2012 and some of the improvements. You can see here that there's 9 bullet points here. I'm going to go through all of these, and these are from Smart's files regarding the upgrades to Smart Response. So thank you to Smart for sharing them through their educator, Smart Certified Educators, that I can go through these with you. So the benefits, you can see over here on the left, more about student learning outcomes. I'm going to spend probably the most amount of time here. Some enhanced usability features, and then support for more languages. So, the educational standards question tagging. This is the biggest one. I'm so excited about it. So students can now be tagged with educational standards, or sorry, not students, questions can now be tagged with educational standards from your province. And I put in province because most of the people watching this with me were going to be Canadian. So obviously the benefits of this is that we can track student performance against our country and province specific outcomes. So I am going to show you what this looks like. But basically what you're able to do is you're able to tap into your curriculum from your province and actually tag per question what you're trying to assess. So before we had the ability to custom put in tags, and not everybody, in fact almost no one I know use those taggings, but all the question tags are stored as what's called the question metadata, and what that means is the data that's going to be stored in teacher tools. So this one's absolutely huge. And then you can customize the tags as well. So if there's something specific that you're trying to assess, you can put in the custom part again. So what does this look like? Let's take a look at a lesson and look at what this looks like. So this is a lesson that I downloaded from the Smart Exchange. I made a few tweaks, and we're going to use this one as our example throughout the day of what we need to change and edit, or what we can change and edit as needed for our students. So this one's ratios and proportion. Grade 7 to 9 math is what it said on the Smart Exchange. And our first question talks about the increase and decrease of ratios, etc. I'm going to talk first about accessibility support. So snaps to my aunt for reminding me about this when we were having an email exchange about assessment a couple of days ago. So some schools and teachers have software that enables things to be read to them. But with this, what we have the ability to do for students who need questions read aloud to them is we can use the new features of Notebook 11, and we can embed sound. So I'm going to grab the question here. So when two quantities increase and decrease, I'm going to use the drop-down menu, and I go to sound, and I'm going to record a sound clip. And I'm going to record this question so my students can have it read to them. So I'm going to click Start Recording. When two quantities increase and decrease in the same ratio, they are in direct proportion. So I'm going to click Stop. I'm going to attach this recording with the object so it's a nice and big target for my kids. I'm going to hit Attach. And now you can see that there's a sound file attached there, and I'm going to play it. When two quantities increase and okay, I don't need to listen to myself talk, but you've got the idea. And now I can do the same thing here for true and false. I can actually record true and false for them. So I can have the integrated reading of the questions here. I've got another, oh, do I have another question? Maybe I don't. I thought I saw a question pop up. If you had a question and I haven't answered it about the accessibility piece, looks like the question part is floating not properly, but you can put it into the chat part and I can grab it from there. So I reminded myself what these standards were because I actually looked it up to make sure I've got it right. But if you know your curriculum off the top of your head, you might not need to do that, but I had to write a little note to myself. So from BC standards, this is grade 7 math. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to tag this question. So I'm going to come to what is now my 6th tab down, my response tab. And here I can see this is a question. Here are my marking properties. Here's my answer key. And within this properties, so I'll just show that quickly one more time. So it says answer key right here, and you need to hit show because the correct answer here is true. But here's where we're going to add our tags. In the past, you could type tags in there, but now I'm going to hit the browse feature. And here are my tags. I'm going to show the tags for British Columbia. I'm going to show them for grade 7 or 8, grade math science, and I'm going to just collapse the British Columbia learning outcomes, grade 7 math, and this was, see I have an absolutely rubbish memory, so I've got to pull this back out. Oh, I can't, that's okay. I believe it was math 7, 3A. There we go. The students will distinguish between rate and ratio. I believe that was the correct one. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click Finish. And so there's my standard directly put in there. When we look at reporting later, what you will see is that this will come out as part of your reporting that you do in your teacher tools. So the students will have the ability to see exactly how they did on a curricular provincial standard. So that, to me, is one of the biggest features in the world, that we don't have to try and type all this in. And you know what, if you can't remember, like I couldn't remember exactly which part of the BC or Alberta or wherever curriculum what you're trying to assess, they've written it out for us so we can remember. So I really, really appreciate the fact that we can directly tap into our province right there. I am going to talk about the cognitive and knowledge levels in a moment. We're going to keep the curriculum and knowledge separate right now. So nothing in the chat, so I'm going to continue. So I'm going to minimize this for now. As I mentioned, we're going to keep looking at the features on that same lesson. So one more question check before I move on to the next phase. Looks like we're all following, which is fantastic. Thank you very much. This one again is huge because depending on who you talk to, curriculum standards aren't going to be our be-all, end-all of the universe, and personal opinion, nor should it be. So the fact that we have the ability now to add some cognitive level question tagging. What do I mean by that? We can grab Bloom's, Marzano's, or depth of knowledge levels and tag those right in. So if we're trying to have them do some remembering, if we're trying to have them do some evaluating, are they applying a skill, we can tag that as well. So Bloom's, I'm just going to break these down quickly. The classification of learning objectives is Bloom's taxonomy. I think we're all quite familiar with this. The 6 levels are integrated right into the question tagging. Marzano's, little bit different, kind of the same. Systematic theory of human thought, which map cognitive tasks is the technical term down at the bottom here. So sometimes I heard a wonderful analogy from my friend and colleague Alex Dunn that sometimes it's about how you organize your closet. So whether you prefer Bloom's or Marzano's, it could be down to how you decide to organize your closet and what works best for you and what method you like to tap into. Cognitive level question tagging, so the DOK, depth of knowledge, again, recall, skills, strategic thinking, so that's a little more simplistic, could be easier to tag that way. So what does that look like? So let's come back to our ratios question right here. I'm going to grab a second question. The ratios 3 and 5 and 9, 18 are in direct proportion, true or false. So from there, what we could do is I could now browse for some tags. I could put in my provincial standard, but I'm also trying to see how well how deep their comprehension was, or their knowledge utilization, etc., etc. So I could just quickly tag these in, click finish. This is just a quick example, but that would then come up in the reporting that I can do through the teacher tools, which is really, really brilliant, that I can actually have some, whoopsies, wrong lesson. I can have some hard data of how we're trying to assess this, and this, which can be challenging for us to do. So it looks like we're still doing okay as far as questions go, so that's awesome. I'm going to keep going. Enhanced teacher tools reports. Now this is something that would be more in-depth during a training session. I was able to point this out to some teachers already right off the bat during some of my August professional development workshops to do with response. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to point out the differences. I'm not going to go into the teacher tools and show all of this. If someone's super, super fascinated by it, then what I can do is I can put together a few YouTube videos. I do see a question now. I'm going to see if I can find a better way to see these questions more effectively, because I wasn't seeing them well. Oh, okay, so here we go. This is really hard to see. Someone had to go, that's okay. Can you do both the curriculum standards and one or more of the others? Excellent question. Absolutely you can. I'm going to go back to that. Ratios and proportions. So what I've assessed here is comprehension, knowledge utilization, but if I go back to my browse, I'm going to go grade 7, math, I'm assessing number, and I'm assessing rate and ratio or percentages, I can even do one or more of these guys. I'm going to just throw in all of those, even though that's not necessarily true for this particular question, but you can see how many tags I can pile up in there. I have yet to encounter a limit for my tags, let's put it that way. So that's a really great question. So I'm going to zip this back out and see if there are any other questions. Doesn't look like it. That's fantastic. Okay, so enhanced teacher tools reports. This is the biggest piece. 16 new types of reporting for a total of 18, i.e. we used to only have 2. We now have the option to do student and class level data. We can save favorite reports in teacher tools. Before, we used to have to make PDFs and save those as extra files, but now the reports that we run can be just integrated into the teacher tools portion and can be retrieved at any time, so you know which reports you've run and when. Preview reports, this is huge. I used to make a whole bunch of different PDFs of stuff that were never quite right. So now I can see the reports before I generate it. And then, of course, I can create those PDF reports. I can export to a CSV file, which for those of us who might not be familiar with CSV, that's a comma-separated value file. And basically, that's usually something that you open up in an Excel spreadsheet. But what that enables you to do is to import stuff like Excel spreadsheets into third-party gradebook stuff, because I realize that pretty much for no one does teacher tools encompass your entire gradebook, nor is it meant to. So if you export it to a CSV file, you have the opportunity to then import it into the gradebook program of your choice to have all your reporting in one place. And then you have bar and line charts, very similar to the pie graphs and the line charts that you can get in your response tab as you're running an assessment. So you can get those as part of your reports now. So I'm going to come into full screen for this, so we can really see. This is a busy page, but I couldn't think of a way to, Smart just did it this way, and this is the best way to show you. So here you can see anything in kind of a burgundy color is new. So assessment for student performance reports, we have all of these here, whereas before we just had a performance summary option. Class performance results or reports, we only had the option previously of a performance summary, but now we have all of these options. Student comparison reports, I've had conversations about this as to, you know, the why of these things. That's a little bit down to personal preference about why one would compare students. Maybe someone who has some assistive technology, one who doesn't, one who is getting one-on-one support, one who isn't. So that is the way that I see it, rather than how's Billy doing versus Sally. That's not what the intent behind this is. It's to be able to see, okay, how is this intervention helping with that child, or that sort of type of reporting. But again, you have these 4 options for assessment: standards, cognitive, and question performance. And class comparison, so if you're teaching 2 different sections of the same course, so grade 7 LA period 1 versus grade 7 LA period 2. How is that class doing versus other classes? So that is, again, an enhancement. So, you know, maybe some people who are doing action research, they could be doing a class where they're using a lot of technology, and then the second period they're doing just paper pencil. So you could compare them that way. So the idea is not, obviously, to do this in any sort of detrimental way for the students, but to help guide teaching and learning. So I'll do a question check at this point to see how this is looking. I don't know why this is so small, but we look to be doing great. I don't see anything in the chat, so I'm going to keep going. We're making great time, which is awesome. Moving on to a second feature, we're going to move past reports. I do have a notebook file that shows some of those reports and what they look like. If anybody's interested, and if we have time at the end, I can show those. But I will put those up on as part of my support documentation on my website, so that if you're trying to show some of the improvements to Response 2012 to others, or you'd be interested yourself, I'll PDF those and put those up. But if we have time, I can certainly show you some of those reports. So if you're not familiar with Response VE, this doesn't really mean anything to you, but if you are, this is certainly huge. So previously with Response VE in its kind of first iteration in the past sort of year and a half, when you did a Response VE quiz, all you would see was the question in text written form, and here, as you can see, it says true, false, and so you would see what you were meant to answer. Now what we have is the images embedded right into Response VE. So you get a screenshot of the teacher's slides. So I'm going to show you what that looks like as far as the quiz we're going to take in a few minutes. So if I come to this response quiz, here you can see here's my first question. And then the students, and in a minute it'll be you guys, answer over here, whereas previously it would just have this text, and I learned through bitter experience if you wrote it in white the text didn't show up, but also it meant that there was no image support for the student. So if you were trying to do a question like what is this arrow pointing to, the students wouldn't be able to see it. So the enhanced image support in Response VE is huge. And what you also get the opportunity to do is the students can zoom in on the image if they're using something like an iPad by touching it, etc., as needed. So they can zoom in on the teacher question as they need to, which is huge. And now VE is localized for 36 different countries, and so there is a country option right here, so they can tell I'm in Canada, but if I'm somewhere else, you can see all of the different options that I'm going to be able to use Response in if I'm in a different country. So that's really a fantastic addition that we're keeping this, we're keeping Smart Global. So obviously enhanced usability for VE, this is huge for the students to be able to see their questions, no doubt about it. Assessment delivery modes. So this is something that was kind of always sort of built in, but is a little bit easier now. So teachers can now choose to deliver their assessments in the self-paced or whole class mode. So the self-paced is the students allowing to answer all the questions at their own pace. Now, same as the past versions of Response, I'm going to talk about rules of thumb with that in a minute. But then the whole class. One thing I'll point out with the clickers for the little kids, and you can see a little image right down here in the bottom, the Response LE, those do have to be asked and answered as a whole class. So you start and stop the assessment, but then you also start and stop each question. So that's something that is a little bit different with those guys, and that's just to help keep everybody up to speed, make sure the kids are with you. But the self-paced option is really, again, a big enhancement that came in a few years ago. Another huge difference between Response and Sentio. So good rules of thumb. To ensure the seamless self-paced question, you want to insert a response title page. So I'm going to come back to my ratios and proportion stuff. And here you can see these are all single questions. And then over here in my response tab, so this is one that I've downloaded from the Smart Exchange. Looks like a nice title page, right? But if I come to my response tab, it says this page has no Smart Response content. The title page is how it's basically like a big stapler that groups everything together, and it gives me my options. So I'm going to click Insert a Title Page. I'm going to put in ratios and proportions as my title. You can choose your type of quiz from here, assessment quiz, exam, test, or custom. More information you put in here. The first two are required, the last two are optional, but the more you put in, the more will be in your teacher tools when you run stuff. And now you can see how this side tab has changed completely. So I have my properties here, I have my type, my title and my type. I have a summary of what's in here. I can start my assessment from the response tab, and here's where I give my feedback. So where I'm going to have them see when they get their answers. So I'm going to give them their feedback when I stop collecting the responses, after all questions are answered, after each question is answered, or I cannot show the students their grades. This portion changes depending on what model you're using, and I'm going to show us how to do that. And then you have a next steps tab is there, and a progress tab, etc., etc. The one thing I will point out right away is that for whatever reason, and I'm working with the development team right now, Response 2012, and I tried it both on a Mac and a PC, has been very, very finicky with these title pages. So I'll start to move forward, and then I'll come back, and all of a sudden my response title page isn't behaving as a response title page anymore, and I don't know why. So it's something I'm working on with them. I don't know why. I'm hoping to get it resolved soon, because I know for me it actually caused some issues when I was doing a feedback at a conference presentation, and I had done, was hoping to save the data from the assessment that I ran, and I did my file and my save as, and I was hoping to save all that data, and when I opened it all up, it was actually gone. So that was really, really unfortunate, and so that's something that I'm really hoping is going to get fixed a little bit better. Okay. If you record your voice over the question to help the students with language, can't they just click the side tab to see the answer? If you, I mean, that's a good question, Katie. This is all about, I guess, classroom monitoring a little bit. So sorry, from recorded voice and the answers have saved the response icon, they would have to answer on the notebook page. So what I would recommend if you want your students to hear this is you have a student obviously close to the teacher computer. You might run this assessment for that student individually. It'd be up on the screen, and then you can help control that by having them listen to the question. When two quantities, but then the student still is holding their clicker, and they'll have to answer holding their clicker. And so yeah, you don't want them coming down to click the yellow response tab to see those, and that's where a lot of times what I do for my students when I'm doing response, I'm going to go into entire page here, is I'm doing this in full screen. So I do this in full screen. I still get my response tabs here. I can still do start my assessment. I can get some response options here. Like here's a dialog box. So if I'm doing my assessment in full screen, increase and decrease in the same ratio, I can still have them playing these sound files without having the ability to come over here and click and see the answer. So it's a little bit of classroom management with that. If you're having a student who needs that extra audio support, it could be that they're working on a separate computer running this assessment sort of thing. So that would be how you would look at that from a management point of view, but you'd still have them holding their clicker to answer their questions. So Katie, I hope that answered your question as far as the use of sound files and the response tab goes. So putting in that response title page is really important. Most of what you're going to download from the Smart Exchange is not going to have a response title page. I hate to tell people what they should do, and I also think that as teachers we often should all over ourselves. We should do this and we should do this, but this one's a little bit of a should. Paper copies of the assessment can and should be printed to truly allow self-paced answering of questions. So what I mean by that is that we can take this response quiz, and I can print this entire quiz for my students just like you would with any other quiz. I love to be as paperless as possible, but you know, for certain questions a student might need the opportunity to write this out. They might need that paper pencil time. You might want to see how they got to this answer. Questions where there's text comprehension, so you're giving them a passage to read and then they have to answer a question. So if you're interspersing questions with content pages, let's say in a language arts environment, you want to give them the true ability to answer this at their own pace. And to do that, you have to, or you really should be printing these up rather than having it just be on the big screen. So to do that, if you're not familiar, you just go File and Print. And then there's several printing options, and there's different options for printing when you've got response. So here's our typical thumbnails. Here's a handouts view, which is what I use for conference presentations if I know, or workshops if I know I'm going to be in an environment where the teachers don't have their own computers. This can be good for notes, but I try to be paperless as much as possible. Full screen, which is one slide, one question per page. But then you can also have all your questions written out like this with all the answers. And then when you're finished a response assessment, you can actually print the results like this. So, and then you have your printer set up and you can obviously send these out. Good rule of thumb is that Smart itself, the questions are in landscape. So to come to the printer setup, it's usually an option given to you in Windows, not always in Mac. It usually just defaults on a Mac. So again, this is a little bit of personal preference. Do you want to give them the thumbnails view? And on the thumbnails view, you can change it to be large thumbnails, so 2 on a page, medium thumbnails. So this is again a little bit of personal preference, but to truly give these students the ability to work at their own pace, it's you set it up, you hit the start assessment button, and then it's them working at their own pace. And so that's where printing the assessment so it looks exactly like the screen helps out a lot. Then if a student has a question and you want to be able to show it to them on a large screen format, you can then navigate. Let me find my question. Here we go. You can navigate to the correct one, or if you see all the students are kind of making a bit of a boo-boo, you can go, okay, everybody, look at this. This was direct proportion. So you can help them out from that point of view if you see that the whole class is misreading a question or something like that. So that is a good rule of thumb to print those out for everybody. So I don't see any additional questions at this point, but it is something that's there and is really good to do. Okay, so I preempted my check there. That's awesome. The mixed mode enhancements, this really isn't going to apply to most people because most people don't have the multiple types of response in a school. However, I will point this out. So, and this is where we're going to take a look at the response setup tool if you don't know about it. So if you use mixed mode, which means 2 or more different types of clickers, you can now choose a variety of different models to integrate together. So if you're in a classroom where you've got some response PE, some response XE, you've got some students working on their iPads, you can let them choose their clickers and then work together with those. The mixed mode supports text compatibility or capability when you're not using the old Sentio or the response LE. So those are the 2 models where we don't have the ability to text. So the LE and the, nope, not BE, the old Sentios. So how are we going to choose our type of clicker? You're going to come to your response tab down in your, if you're on a Windows, it's going to be at the bottom right hand side. It's going to be a little response dude right here, and you're going to click on your response tool. And you're going to click Setup Tool right there. If you're on a Mac, you're going to see the same exact icon, and I'm actually just going to bring in a blank page so we can really see what I'm doing. You're going to see the same exact response icon, but it's going to be up at the top in your tools at the top. So they're just opposite. So I'm going to grab my Smart Response icon and I'm going to click Setup Tool. The disadvantage of this, and someone like me who flips back and forth between assessments and clickers and stuff like that, it is a little cumbersome. To change the model that you want to use, you actually need to be closed out of Notebook and you can't have a class started. So right now I've got Response VE selected. So here's all the different modes that Response VE supports. If you've got the older Sentios, if you click on that, you can see that the text option gets grayed out. If you've got Response LE, you're going to click on that, and these 3 options get grayed out. So what I'm finding with a lot of people when they're upgrading from Notebook 10 to Notebook 11, and thus Response 2011 to Response 2012, the default for lots of us has been this Notebook SE, which was the classroom suite that I was talking about. Katie, this might have a problem with your receiver as well. So if you're finding some things are going a little funky, come into this response setup tool and make sure that you've selected the right model. This used to be very, very, very well hidden in your programs bar. So now it's right in your response icon down in your notification area. But what I was just referencing was the ability to use multiple response devices in the same class. So I can include VE, I can include Centio or LEs, and so multiple devices supports different learning styles. If you've got them, I realize not everybody has the luxury of multiple options. I'm going to click Response VE because that's what we're going to use in a few minutes. With Response VE, I accept the tools, and this is the pop-up menu you get when you try to make changes in Notebooks Open. So I'm already on VE, so I don't actually need to apply those changes. But that was the ability to have mixed mode enhancements, which is really great. The multiple receiver support. So this is if you're working in a large environment. So for higher ed institutions, for instance, this is huge. Oopsies, I did want my screen shade. Oh well. Before we had one receiver. With LE and PE, we had a maximum of around 100 students. XE, we had a maximum of around, LE and PE 60, XE 100. Now what you can do is you can plug in more than one receiver, and then you can get up to 300 questions or 300 students. With XE, you can get up to 500 students. It is a little limited that you need to use your grouping a little bit to group the questions, so you have to group them 5 at a time. So for most of us, we're not going to be assessing more than 300 students, but it's good to know that there's a possibility for this. Or if you're doing a presentation to a pack, for instance, you want to grab a whole bunch of clickers and have everybody participating, you just plug more than one receiver in and you've got some options. And the last bit of the enhancement is the languages. So for the Mac, this wasn't necessarily fantastic before in that we only had English. So my French friends were really out of luck on a Mac. So all of the ones in burgundy here are enhanced and added for the Mac platform with new language support. So that's fantastic. One last question check before we actually go and just do a quick one together. Looks like we're all good. And what we're going to do now is we're actually going to do an assessment. So if you've got a second device like an iPad or you've got an iPhone or something like that, or you can just open up a second browser and just listen to my voice, and you're going to go to response.smarttech.com and it'll look like this. Don't put in www, just put in response.smarttech, smarttech.com, and this is where it's challenging to do this as a webinar because I can't see how you guys are doing it or if you've logged in. So I'm just going to go on faith that you're all savvy enough to go to response.smarttech.com, and you're going to type in an assessment ID. You're going to leave the student ID blank, and you're going to just click sign in. And our assessment ID is the following: 608768. It's always a 6-digit number. It's always different every time you log in. Question came up with my last webinar: is the server in Canada for our Freedom of Information and Privacy Act issues? Absolutely, I've confirmed it's 100% stored in Canada, which is so great. I'm so glad World Headquarters is in Calgary. So assessment ID is 608-768. One more time, 608-768. Those of you who are way ahead of me, we're probably already logging in. I can see, and so maybe some of us haven't logged in, but you can start whenever you're ready. So if you're looking at mine instead of your own, you can answer these questions. So question 1 was, did today's webinar provide you with a better understanding of some new things to do with Smart Response? A, no, I didn't find the content useful. B, some of it was new and useful. Yes, some good information. So A, B, C, you can choose. Then you just use the blue navigation arrows to go to the next one. I've got a question here. Where did I generate it? I'm assuming you mean where did I generate that number? Good question, Katie. When I am starting an assessment, what I do from my response title page is I click Start this assessment now, and the response software, and this is where VE is different from every other model of response. VE talks to the server and generates a unique ID every time I run an assessment. So when you purchase a license to Response VE and it's teacher license based, you get an activation code that's different from plugging in your receiver, and that's the code that lets you talk to the smart server in Calgary. So the software generates it for me. I don't have to do any work. So that was where we got that number of 608768 from. So I can see some of us have answered our questions and are moving forward, which is great. The second question was, the information most useful had to do with A, enhanced reporting, B, the versions of clickers, C, I can still use, or differentiation possibilities with C, and D, I can use my old Centios still. And that is a multiple answer one. So you can check off as many of these boxes as you would like. Question 2 is, I might be able to start using some of what I learned today very soon, yes or no? And this is just some feedback for me to know if what I've provided you with was useful today. And then question 4 is just feedback again for me as a text answer. And I always say that, you know, it's around 140 characters, which is about the length of a tweet for those of you who use Twitter. So you can put in whatever you'd like there, and I will see. I don't know why I keep getting these commercials popping up. I'll be able to see what you've written. So here, if you're following along with me back in Notebook, actually I'll come back to response. What I'll do is I'll type in a quick text answer here. You can see your question list, so you can see what you've answered, and then you can go back and change your questions if you'd like to, but then you hit submit. And then that's how I see your answers at the end, is when you click submit. So if I'm looking at my progress tab, I can actually look at some of my responses here. And so I see that about over half of us got some useful stuff. Sorry to that one person who didn't find the content useful. I apologize. Let me know what I can do to change. Question 2, it looks like lots of things was possible for us, and that was great. Some of us might be able to start to use this right away. Some of us, if we don't have the hardware, we can't start to use this right away, but hopefully it helps us to be able to move forward and advocate for some assessment tools for the students. And then from here, I can see that we've got some text answers, and I can actually see what some of you have answered. So someone wrote, hello, that was me. Someone wrote all good and fantastic, and I appreciate the feedback. Thank you very much. So that is a little taste. I'm going to keep that running in case you haven't finished or hit submit yet, but that's a little taste of what Response VE can look like in your classroom. So the webinar will be archived both at the Sharps education part of the website, but also on my YouTube channel. I did, for those of you who haven't been following me and paying attention to what I do for a little bit, I did have to move my YouTube channel recently because my last name is challenging to spell, and I hadn't thought of that at the time. So I did move it to youtube.com/Sasha Tech, TECH1, and so the webinar will be posted here eventually. So it was a bit sad to have to start all over, but that's okay. So the webinar will be posted here if you want to rewatch parts of it or share it or whatever you'd like. And then my old webinars are also posted here, which is a useful tool for those of you who might need that moving forward. I do plan in the next couple weeks to add some more videos about using Response. Things like how to pair your LE clickers with your class lists and things like that will be going up. And pretty much everything will be posted on the Sharps education website, support documents and things like that I'll put together. And if you go sharpsav.com/education, and then if you click on events and webinars, then you can see the list of the ones that I've done and ones that'll be upcoming. And there's this webinar support documents there, and then I'm going to start to put my support documents in a couple other places, like in the support for educators tab and things like that. But you all at least got the auto-generated email that was from my email address from GoToWebinar. So you all have my email address now. So if you need some additional help and support, I'm able to provide that for anybody who might need. So I think that, let me check if there's anything in chat and no other questions. So we're a little 5 minutes over, but I'm happy to have been able to spend the afternoon with some of you, and I appreciate any feedback that you might have for me moving forward. And have a lovely, for most of us, cold and snowy or rainy rest of our Wednesday afternoon. Thanks, everybody.